Welcome to our RISE training for the administration of benchmarks and interim assessments, as well as mid-year summatives. I am Elise Fry, the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with USBE. I'm joined today by a few colleagues from USBE, as well as some representatives from CAI, our vendor for RISE. They will be offering support by monitoring the chat, responding to other items as needed. Just as a reminder, this training is being recorded and will be posted to our assessment YouTube channel in the next few days. I am hopeful that I will be able to share the link with you in the next week's AD memo. I will also work with Emily Ing, our support specialist, to share the slide deck with you through Midas as well. So if you've registered, you have the Zoom link to attend here, but you will also have a PDF of the slides provided in your Midas. If you aren't familiar with my trainings, I do build in question moments as we transition between topics, but you are welcome to drop questions in the chat as well, and we can address those as they come in. So today we're going to go through the RISE portal and look at the types of tests provided, how to access the resources like the TAM and the TIDE user guide, and we'll go through TIDE, and then also look at the test delivery system and the administration interface, as well as reporting. After all of that, there will also be some remote specific guidance at the end for those who want to stay on for that. I'm hoping after our time together today, you feel more comfortable training the other users in your LEA, as well as providing support for them within the RISE system. So to begin, if you're not currently receiving portal updates from RISE, I would encourage you to subscribe on the portal. Just go to utahrise.org and click the second button at the bottom of the screen. Once you've registered, you'll receive email notifications whenever a resource is updated or an announcement is published to the portal. There are 4 types of tests provided through the RISE portal, and we're going to look at each of them individually in just a bit. But first, we're going to talk about their availability. The training tests are always available. The benchmark module availability is almost all school year. This year, however, the RISE ELA benchmark modules are undergoing enhancements, so their availability is slightly different than the other content areas. Please note the September 17th date of availability, because it has been messaged previously as September 7th. Okay, it is actually September 17th. So hopefully that doesn't hinder too much, but just be aware of that and make sure that you are communicating that as previous communications have said September 7th. Okay, the benchmark modules are basically tools for teachers to use with students that focus on specific strands within the Utah core standards. They are fixed form, meaning students answer the same items, and they're designed to be administered in one sitting, so not over the course of multiple days. But they will provide teachers and students an opportunity to identify strengths and weaknesses regarding specific knowledge, skills, and abilities as it relates to the Utah core. They're generally anywhere from 8 to 22 items, just depending on the content area and the different DOK levels, but it's important to understand that questions on the benchmarks can be weighted differently when it comes to reporting. Benchmark modules can be taken multiple times if you are looking to show growth. Participation in them is not required, and reporting is only provided for LEA and school use. No results are collected by USBE. A list of available benchmark modules is available on the RISE portal. Just keep in mind, these are not meant to be predictive of how students perform on the summative assessments, and they do need to be administered through the secure browser. They can also be administered remotely. Reporting shows as raw scores, and it can be shared with students. Teachers can also review classroom level responses in a whole class setting. You just need to take considerations in for protecting PII. You also need to think about how to provide instruction for students who may have a parental exclusion who didn't participate. And also know that teachers cannot copy, paste, or photograph those test questions or prompts or reading passages into other presentations or assessments, or even record themselves while reviewing. I see a question in the chat. It's my understanding that RISE benchmarks are required in order to do summatives remotely. Is that true? The benchmarks are not required, Del Rey. A training test is required. It is great practice to be using the benchmarks in the remote setting, just because it would provide practice in that respect or familiarity with the system. But a benchmark's not required for remote testing. Training tests are required for remote testing. The interim assessments are also optional Participation in these is determined locally. Just like the benchmark modules, student results are provided for LEA and school use, but not collected by USBE. Note that there are no ELA interim assessments for this school year due to the changes in the core and enhancements being made. So just be aware of that. Students may participate in one grade level interim per subject in the fall, and then again, one per subject in the winter. Interim assessments are adaptive, meaning different questions are going to be given to students based on previously answered questions. And the results of interim assessments can be considered predictive of summative performance. It is not recommended, though, that schools administer both benchmark modules and interims because they share the same item bank, meaning students could have exposure to the same question multiple times, okay? The interim assessments are permitted to be administered remotely as well using the secure browser. With these results, they are reported as scale scores as well as proficiency levels. They can also be shared with students. And like the benchmarks, teachers can review classroom level responses as a whole class. But again, considerations just need to be made to protect student information, and teachers still cannot copy, paste, or photograph any of these test items or move them into another LMS system for distribution. The RICE summative assessments are designed to assess knowledge, skills, and abilities described in the core standards for ELA, writing for grades 5 and 8, math, and science. Blueprints are provided on the RICE portal, but the summative items and stimuli are not able to be reviewed with students or discussed in the class or reviewed during instructional conversations. Remote administration of summative assessments will continue to be provided for students who are receiving 100% of their instruction online. However, just like last year, if a student is enrolled in a brick and mortar building for any course, even just one course, they will be expected to test in person. And get really excited, this includes secondary math 1 and science tests this year. One caveat to be aware of is that secondary math 1 will not be available for the mid-year summative window, just the spring window, so just plan accordingly. More information is provided in the TAM, and there will be specific remote guidance, which it differs slightly from standard administration, but we'll hopefully be able to hit on some of that at the end today as well. I see in the chat, can teachers see the interim questions like they can with the benchmarks, or is it more like the summative? They can see questions and review them with the interims, similar to the benchmarks. It's not quite the same, but it is similar. Summative, they can see nothing. The questions are secure. Now, this is one of those things I've seen an increase in issues with over the last year or so, even though it's always mentioned in trainings. It just doesn't seem to translate down to our teacher users. So take note, it is important to be aware that even within the parameters of your set testing windows, test opportunities expire. When a test expires, it becomes unavailable to the student, even if they weren't finished. So if the test opportunity isn't completed within its allotted time frame, it's going to expire, meaning that the student no longer has access to make any changes or complete that work. If a test expires and the student needs to access it again, you do have to file a test appeal request, okay? Test appeals should not be filed for benchmark modules though, okay? Because they can be taken as many times as the teacher chooses. And if the first attempt isn't completed within 7 days, the student just needs to start over because the previous work is no longer active. And benchmarks are designed to be given in one sitting anyway, okay? So it shouldn't be taking multiple days to complete those. When it comes to the interim and summative tests, if you work as an assessment director, it is your responsibility to approve or deny those test appeal requests. More information is in the TIDE user guide, and we're actually going to go over the process in greater detail during our winter training to prep for summative administration. But as a teaser, we're also going to talk about test appeals in a decent amount of detail during our Building Connections meeting in September. New this year, there's also more clarification in the TAM and the RICE calculator manual regarding calculator use. I would recommend sharing this with your math teachers, especially those in grades 6 through 8, but it's a good reminder for all users. Calculators are not allowable for grades 3 through 5, and only scientific handhelds or the ones provided on screen should be used for grades 7 and 8. Grade 6 has an on-screen calculator for the second segment, but a handheld 4-function calculator is allowable for students who have that documented on their IEP or 504. With that, we're in our first little question break. Do you need any clarification around the 4 test types, their windows of availability, expiration, calculator use, any of those things? As a reminder, again, these slides will be shared with registered participants through Midas. So if there's something that was on a slide you'd like to review again, you'll be able to do that at your leisure. Let's see. Follow up to prior questions. So teachers can see questions on the interim prior. Oh, Jolyn, no, they can't see the questions prior to assigning. They can see questions after in reporting, like after students have responded to them. And then where would teachers see those interim questions? Again, that's what is visible in reporting after students have responded. The benchmark preview is available, and we'll actually look at that in just a little bit. Slides will show up in Midas after today. Yes, George, I will get these condensed and shared with Emily. She's usually really good about even getting them in today, but for sure, tomorrow, they should be in there. Does the IEP 504 have to stay handheld calculator? That is a great question for our special education specialist, Jessica Wilhelm, as she works with accommodations. Yep, no problem. Anything else before moving on to more in-depth information with the types of tests? Hey. 6th grade IEP students can use calculator on entire test. No, not the entire test, only in the section where the online shows up. It's segment 2. Science is not required to be tested in person anymore. Nope. Science will be able to be administered online if the student receives all instruction online. The specific calculator for 6th grade, it's just a 4-function one, Brian. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. It can have 0 fancy things. And again, only for segment 2.
And Elise, I'm here too if you have any additional calculator questions.
Katie is our calculator guru, aka math specialist extraordinaire. Okay, perfect. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to talk about the training tests. The importance of utilizing the training test is really simple. It is the best way to familiarize ourselves and our students with the functionality of the system. It also includes various item types and as well as the administration procedures. So students can familiarize themselves also with the global tools in a really low stakes environment. They can try all the things out. Furthermore, another missed step a lot of the time is giving training tests in all content areas. Oftentimes a teacher might think, well, I've given an ELA training test a couple of times. My students are used to it. I don't really see the value in a science or a math one, which just isn't the case because there are many components to the system which are content specific, like the calculator or lack thereof, as well as various item types, which if students aren't seeing them in the training environment, they might experience some difficulty when taking a benchmark, the interim, or the summative. Okay, there's far too much truth to this little comic than I dare care to admit because we hear about it so often. Okay, with more exposure to the system, we can alleviate this concern. The training tests are provided on the RISE portal. They don't require RISE login credentials. If you haven't taken a training test recently, I would encourage you to take some time and use the guest user access that's provided. This will give you a similar experience to what teachers and students experience. It only takes about 10 to 15 minutes. Note though, if you're looking at them for the first time with your students, it might take a little bit longer as you all orient yourself with where tools are, how they work, and so on, things like that. You may notice there are 2 different ways to take a training test. The training test option is a public option. There's a guest login. It's very simple. For this option, you just select training tests without a proctor and sign in. This is great for teachers and staff to familiarize themselves with what the platform looks like and how it functions. It's also a great way to orient anyone who's expected to administer a RISE test. This could include your paras or teachers of non-core content areas. It can also be used as an informative tool for parents, as they may have questions about what their students experience. You can direct them here, or you can even walk them through it. You can also administer a training test in a test session to mirror the RISE process. This requires the SSID, a valid session ID, and the secure browser. These are far more useful when prepping for test administration because using RISE login credentials better mirrors the RISE summative process. If you have been taking advantage of the interims or benchmarks, you've already been able to practice this login process as well. If you choose to try this type of experience, just be sure to select the test administration option in the preparing for testing section. Using this option also allows you to verify any accommodations which might be set for students needing those services. We will go into more detail regarding accommodations later, but know that those need to be set for students prior to the student signing into the browser for those accommodations to be available. After selecting the type of desired administration, you'll be able to select your grade level as well as the training test you wish to take. Note these are banded. The content is not single grade specific. It's important to help students and your teachers understand that content mastery is not the purpose of the training test. The purpose of the training test is to become familiar with the system itself, the question item types, and the tools provided. As I mentioned before, the training test can be used to verify accommodations and ensure resources are applied and work correctly prior to taking other assessments. So once accommodations or resources have been assigned through TIDE to individual student accounts, students should sign in with their username and SSID for practice, and you can review them here with those settings that appear. And even though content mastery is not a purpose of the training test, scoring assertions are provided to give feedback on student responses with scoring criteria on cluster items specifically. The training test also has Spanish adaptive functionality. Guidance for accessing training tests with Spanish enabled is outlined on this slide. Note that when students select Spanish from the language dropdown, the screen's contents are going to switch to Spanish, but the student can toggle between Spanish and English within the training test using the button which becomes available to them. This is imperative for students to experience if you are considering the Spanish adaptive form of the summative assessment. Okay, we want students to be familiar with the system functionality long before their summative assessment experience. Many tests have been reset from the Spanish adaptive form back to the English form because students weren't familiar with how the Spanish adaptive form would appear. And know that the language services team, including parents and the student, need to be consulted before this option is provided for a student. More guidance and information is also provided in the TAM. It's important to note that the use of the Spanish adaptive functionality on a Windows device does require that the Spanish voice pack be installed. You'll want to complete these steps to verify this has been completed. Again, this is for Windows specific devices. The secure browser is required for administering all benchmark, interim, and summative assessments, as well as the secure administration of the training tests. So it needs to be installed on the devices prior to administration. Instructions for installation are in the tech resources link found under the resources section of the RISE portal. Just make sure you refer to the supported browsers before you run any updates on your system. If you have issues with the secure browser on a device, you'll need to reach out to your tech specialist. There are also troubleshooting guides for various operating systems in the tech resources provided on the portal. If you are the tech specialist, as there are a few of you who wear multiple hats for your LEA, this is where you can find those resources. Are there any questions regarding training tests or the secure browser? Will training tests still be required immediately prior to summative administration? Yes, Rachel, as far as I know, that is still an expectation. Other questions before we move on to other resources and systems? Okay. So we're going to look at the other resources and systems provided in the portal. This is just a really high-level overview of what each of these provides. You'll see there's 5 different tabs to choose from, along with an abbreviated version of what you'll find or be able to do in each of these sections. Nicole, what do you mean immediately prior? Like 3 minutes before. Like you should, if you are doing remote administration of a summative, you are going to ensure that all devices are working properly with a training test before you do your summative. We're going to start now looking at resources. The resources tab houses the tech resources that I previously mentioned, as well as other helpful guides like the TIDE user guide, the TAM, as well as the reporting guide. To find these, you just select the user guide folder under Browse. There are lots of other available resources that you can browse, but we're just going to focus on the available user guides since that's really the bread and butter for test administration. The TIDE user guide is where you'll take care of all of the accounts, adding accommodations for students who require them, as well as monitoring test participation. It also outlines the appeals process for admin and LEA users. The TAM has the step-by-step process outlined for how teachers administer tests, how students take them. It also contains the scripting required for administration. I would recommend that all test administrators familiarize themselves with the TDS and scripted sections prior to administration, just to alleviate confusion that may occur on day of administration. The reporting guide includes all of the information needed to access your reports once students have completed testing. This is available for all tests except training tests. The second menu tab is the benchmark module preview system, and it's available to all users except students who are registered in TIDE. Because of this, the information housed here is not considered public. This system allows users to securely preview benchmark modules to determine appropriate instructional use. It is not appropriate to use the benchmark module preview system with your students. Okay, it is not appropriate to copy any of those items into another format. Directions for how to use the benchmark module previews can be found in the TAM in the RISE benchmark module preview system section. Once you've logged in and selected the module you want to preview, you'll be able to toggle between the questions. You can view any of the stimuli associated with the questions, like a reading passage. Again, this is not used for instructional or practice purposes with students or parents. This is just for teachers to determine which benchmark modules best fit their classroom and instructional goals. Back to the chat. Will these manuals be getting updated before end of year testing? George, yes. In fact, the TIDE user guide as well as the reporting guide have already been posted with updates. The TAM should be ready and posted by next week with updates that have occurred over the summer. Every once in a while, there will be updates that occur during the school year, but things like that tend to be nuanced, like spelling or formatting mistakes, generally not administration or practical things. If that does occur, though, we try to put that in the AD memo as well. The benchmark questions are the same ones the students will see. Yes, if you're looking at the preview module, those are going to be the ones that students see if you assign that particular benchmark. So now we're going to look at TIDE. TIDE stands for Test Information Distribution Engine. When you select the TIDE tile, you are going to be prompted to log in with your credentials. Once logging in, the TIDE homepage will appear, and it reflects the stages of the testing process. Note that the blue after testing section is actually for LEA level users only. So if you don't have an LEA level account, you're only going to see the first orange and green sections. There's also a waffle menu on the left-hand side, which allows you to switch between applications, and the Secure File Center is where you can access secure documents and student data files you've previously exported, as well as downloaded or archived. You can also delete previously exported files from there. Permissions for accessing data and viewing other information in TIDE is determined by your user role, and there are 6 different user roles. Those 6 roles have different permissions associated with them, which also changes their access of information. This screenshot from the TIDE guide gives you an idea of how those permissions break down. For example, a district LEA level user can perform tasks that are not available to a school level user. You can also see here that LEA and school administrators are granted more permissions than teachers and proctors. Permissions also limit the scope of data access. So a district level user can work with data pertaining to their district's any school in that district, or an individual teacher, while a school level user can only work with data pertaining to their assigned school, or if you're a teacher, only their assigned rosters. Now we're going to look at each of these sections individually. We're going to start with preparing for testing, the orange section. Here, you can view and edit user accounts as well as add new users. LEA users hold the responsibility for ensuring teacher and admin accounts are kept current. So when you have teachers that are no longer associated with your LEA, those accounts actually need to be removed because oftentimes another LEA is trying to add them and they can't do that if you haven't removed them from your org to begin with. The student dropdown will allow you to access and edit student accounts, like adding accommodations, okay, as well as uploading student settings, or you can create frequency distribution reports, which we're going to go over a little bit later. Just know that frequency distribution reports allow you to filter by grade and things like scribe or color choice, assistive technology, things like that. But whenever you're accessing student information, the results are going to be exported to your secure file center that we touched on earlier on the TIDE homepage. This just allows for larger result tables and can export as an Excel file or a CSV file. We're going to take a slight detour over to rosters as it works with the student tab a bit. The rosters tab allows you to search pre-existing rosters. You can create or edit or delete any user-defined rosters, and you can also view or review, look at system-defined rosters. Sometimes I'm asked why someone would want a user-defined roster, and this works really well if a teacher who works with students who receive special ed services, that teacher might want to create a roster with students they work with who are already assigned to a system-defined roster with another teacher. Sometimes this can also be helpful in a co-teaching situation. Remember that system-defined rosters cannot be edited. Okay, they are loaded through the Utrecht sync. If you're experiencing any rostering issues, please reach out to our data specialist who oversees Utrecht's, Maureen Rushing. She's really great at helping you track down students who aren't showing up. And it's usually because they have a fatal error or are new enough the systems haven't synced yet. If that's not the case, though, she can put in a ticket to have things fixed up for you. If you are interested in creating a user-defined roster, you'll want to add a roster and then search for the students that you wish to have populate that roster. You'll then name the roster, select the teacher or other school personnel you'd like associated with it, and then select the students that you want to add and use the add or remove icons to edit. When you're finished, you just save and continue. You can also create user-defined rosters with the bulk upload. And to do that, you just fill out the template, upload it in TIDE, verify the information is correct, upload it. Are there any questions regarding the RISE portal's user guides or rostering? Again, I can't answer your super specific roster questions. That's why I put Maureen's email on this slide. But if there's something that is about accessing rosters, I'm happy to respond to those. Perfect. Maureen's even in the chat too. If you have a question specific, you can drop it in the chat for everyone to reference or even message her directly. Okay. With that, we're going to just kind of now go back to that student drop down and look more closely at these last two components. Now, in an effort to not have to travel backwards through the slides, this is kind of the all call for how to set accommodations for students within the RISE system. So if you are multitasking, this is a stop, look, and listen moment for your accommodation settings. This is a demo student record and gives you an idea of what an individual student record might look like. The student information used to search is displayed at the top, while the student participation is displayed at the bottom. You can view individual settings by clicking the edit pencil icon on the left. Clicking that icon allows you to see assessments and benchmark modules the students already participated in, if there are any parental exclusions associated with the student, as well as view or set the student test settings and accommodations. This includes the Spanish adaptive option for summative tests. Okay, to set the accommodations for students who need them, you'll need to click that little pencil icon, and that's going to take you to the student test settings screen. I know it's really small print, but once you click on that pencil icon, you'll note there are separate menus which will expand or condense based on the little plus minus buttons on the left. If you look at the very top, there are student information, student participation rosters, and benchmark parental exclusion menus, which have not been expanded. I've chosen to just expand the bottom 4 menus, okay, just so you can see where to set those. To do so, to set those accommodations, you're going to use the series of drop-down menus or toggle switches to make any changes to assistance tools, presentation modifications, and other accommodations outlined in a student's IEP or 504 documents. Okay, accommodations are not uploaded through the Scram or UTrex. They are taken care of manually through this section. This is also where you can set the Spanish adaptive feature for the summative assessment for math and science. If you have questions regarding a student's accommodations, how to set them, or any questions on what would be available, just reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist who oversees RISE. Her email does appear on a slide coming up soon as well. To apply the Spanish adaptive feature, you would select Spanish under the math and or science test families and click Save. We have developed recommendations for students who we feel would benefit most from the Spanish adaptive version of the summative assessment, and these recommendation guidelines are provided in the TAM. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to note that the decision ultimately needs to be determined by the LEA's language services team with support of the parent and student preference. This isn't going to show up in TIDE, but I wanted to bring attention to what it looks like for students in the testing environment. So once that language setting is applied, the Change Language button will appear with all of the other global tools in the student's secure browser. Okay. Question in the chat, is there a way to get a demo student for us for training? No, Christine, there are not demo students, but you can do a guest user login on a training test. But not a demo account within the student settings, if that's what you're talking about. Finally, also under the students menu is the frequency distribution report. This is the one that I talked about earlier. It's available at the LEA or school level. The results can be displayed in tabular or like a grid format, a graph, or you can go both. Okay. If you have students who require the use of assistive technology or a scribe, you will need to make requests to USBE through TIDE using the Forms menu. This will alert USBE and it does require approval. On the next page, after you've selected that, you're going to pick the type of form you want to submit. It's recommended that you have students who, if you have students who are using dictation or speech to text, that you fill out the scribe or speech to text request form, not the assistive technology request form. For assistive technology requests, you're going to complete the form. You got to detail the demographic information of the school, as well as the requirement of the accommodation. All sections of the form have to be completed before it will allow you to submit it. Once you've completed the form, you have to agree that the accommodation is documented, used regularly, and with fidelity in class instruction, and has been attempted in training tests to ensure it functions as expected for the student. If you agree, you click the I agree box, you then submit. It's important to know that upon submission, a tracking identifier is going to be provided. It is recommended you save this identifier just so that you can easily track the status of your accommodations requests. Also note here that once submitted, the requests cannot be edited or changed. The request is going to be reviewed by USBE staff. Upon approval, staff will enable the requested accommodations in TIDE. Again, if there's any questions regarding accommodations, you'll need to reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist. These request forms can be submitted by school administrative users, correct? Cassidy, that's a great question. Colin, do you know the users which can submit those? I don't have that off the top of my head. Correct. Yeah, okay. School administrator and LEA level users can submit those. Thank you. If you need to enter a parental exclusion for a benchmark, the process is different from how we add those participation codes for interim and summative assessments. We're going to look at that soon. but for now, we're going to focus on the benchmark modules. You can do this manually or as a file upload. To do it manually, fill in the appropriate search fields for the LEA, school, and any student information you have to help narrow down your search. And once you've got the information entered, select the search button that's centered at the bottom of the screen. You'll then see the student settings that you're familiar with. On this screen, you can verify participation codes which have already been applied within the student settings. Again, we're going to look at how to set these ones soon, but you can also look at which ones have a parental exclusion and where you can edit those if necessary. So beneath the student participation roster sections, you can expand the benchmark parental exclusion settings, and you'll see drop-down menus. You just select yes or no as needed for those. Remember, this process is very specific to the parental exclusion for the benchmark modules. If you need to apply a 204 parental exclusion code for interim and summative, it's different, and we're going to look at that next. The last dropdown is where you view or edit those participation codes. These participation codes are used by USBE for summative tests, like the 204 parental exclusion, okay? These are entered for both interim and summative assessments. To add a participation code to a student, you're going to search for the student using the filters. Click search, and the search results table will show the students who match the search criteria you've entered. The participation codes column lists any that are already currently assigned. To edit those, you select the pencil icon for the student whose participation code you want to update. You'll then use the drop-down menus available for each test the student is eligible for, and you just update those as needed. As a note here, this drop-down will go through an update prior to November as code 201 is being retired, and there will be a few new ones taking its place to better delineate if the student's receiving a language accommodation, SPED accommodations, or both, rather than the 201 generic accommodation participation code. As a rule of thumb, if a student is not appearing on a roster, whether it be for a benchmark or an interim or a summative, check the parental exclusion status, whether it be here for interim and summative or back on the student test settings for the benchmark modules, because if the student has any of those parental exclusions entered, they are not going to show up on a roster, okay? Finally, we have the testing windows. Some of you may have already created your windows for benchmarks and interims, which is great. If you haven't, I would strongly recommend doing so. This is one of those things which even still causes some issues because teachers are able to administer any test at nearly any time if you don't have them set. Also note, you will be able to set your summative window when the mid-year summative window opens on November 5th. And you will want to do that to ensure that summative tests aren't given in error. To do that, you'll first enter the required information at the top of the panel, then select the tests from the list to add to the window, click save, and this is going to, it'll create the window for you. If you don't want to create your testing windows manually, you can also use the file upload process. Guidance for how to do that is included in the best practices for using test windows document, and the template required is linked right below it. It's important to set your testing windows so that tests, especially summative tests, aren't taken by mistake. By setting the windows, when a teacher goes to administer a test, only the ones you've chosen to make available during that time are going to appear as options. When all is said and done, you should have created 3 separate test windows, one for each of the testing types. Okay. Are there any questions regarding participation codes or testing windows? I just would remind you here as well to direct any of your questions regarding accommodations to Jessica. She couldn't be with us today, but she will respond to any email that you send her. Not seeing anything in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. So back to our resources and our systems tiles. The test administration tab is for anyone administering a test. That's where they're going to go to prepare and manage their live testing sessions. So before you conduct any testing, I would recommend going through this checklist to ensure that all of your bases are covered. If you have questions regarding the standard test administration testing ethics policy training, you can contact Kim Rathke, our testing and data coordinator. I would recommend that you review the TAM, make sure that your scripts are ready to read. You'll want to ensure that devices that students are going to be using are able to support RISE testing and are in working order. This includes keyboards, computer mice, headphones, all of those things. Make sure students who require accommodations have the appropriate settings applied. You'll also want to take into account your classroom environment. You'll want to eliminate distracting noises. Do not play music during standardized assessments. That's one of those things that makes it standardized. Okay. Cover or remove any materials that provide answers to students. When I was in the classroom, I just tacked up bed sheets over all of my walls and just eliminated all issue. You'll need to notify students of your electronic device policy prior to administration. Remember that no devices are allowed during testing. Electronic devices would include cell phones, smartphones, smartwatches, any internet capable devices, things like that. Okay. If you have elected to use testing tickets, there's a few places you can access them. However, I think that the print test tickets option in the green section is the easiest and most accessible place to get them. After selecting the print test tickets dropdown, you'll select the print from roster list, where you'll be prompted to use the dropdown menus for the roster type and the teacher name to create the list. From there, you select the section you wish to print test tickets for, and the printer icon will become available for you to print those from your device once you've selected those. We will look at the monitoring test progress section, but not appeals and after testing. They become more important when we get to the summative testing. So we're going to look at those again more closely in the training in the winter as we prepare for summative administration, but we're definitely going to look at monitoring test progress here. There's a plan and manage testing report under monitoring test progress that details all of a student's testing opportunities and the status of those testing opportunities. The plan and manage testing page has basic search and advanced search options. This slide shows the advanced search and its available search criteria. The basic search is designed for quick access and offers a really pared down selection of options. After you fill out the search criteria, you'll select generate report and the participation results will appear. A grid will appear containing the student's participation. Not all columns of the grid are selected by default though. So to add or remove information, you're going to use the filter button at the top right of the table. As a note here, the test administrator name displayed on the plan and manage testing report does not imply the name of the teacher. The test administrator is the person who conducts the test. So this can be the same as the teacher, or it might even be a different person. Because the reports list the testing opportunities, a student can also appear more than once on a report. You can export these search results to an Excel or a CSV, as well as other typed search results. Now we're going to move into actual test administration. These are the same 6 steps for any RISE test or a benchmark module. 2 proctors are best for test security. One can be the roaming proctor as, if you are testing in person. While these 2 proctors do not need to be certified teachers, they do need to have gone through the appropriate testing ethics training to serve as a test administrator or proctor. The first step in administering any test is to create the testing session, and this needs to be done less than 20 minutes before starting the test in order to prevent the system from timing out. The test selection window color codes the available tests and organizes them into categories. You can click the plus sign button next to the category to view the tests in that category. And then just click the tests you wish to administer, or you can click the checkbox for a category to include all tests. Students are only going to have access to the tests you include in the test session that they are eligible to take. Okay. You will need to select a reason from the drop-down menu, and then you just click your start session button. On the same screen from that previous slide, if a summative test is selected, a pop-up box is going to appear. New last year in our continued effort to prevent misadministration of summative tests, this important box appears. It says, if you are about to select a summative test, students have only one opportunity to take this test. Click OK to continue. If you really want to administer this, please type summative. The test administrator then has to physically type summative to move on. Or if they've made a mistake, hopefully they click that X in the corner. We experienced quite the uptick in misadministrations prior to last year due to users not paying attention to which test they were selecting, but this new feature dropped those misadministrations dramatically. I actually only recall 2 instances last year where this occurred. Again, though, Since it didn't eliminate them entirely, it is imperative that teachers know they need to disengage from autopilot. Read for understanding when administering a test. If we expect it from our students, we need to expect it from ourselves as well. So once you click that start session button, the system is going to generate the session ID. The ID appears at the top of the screen along with the stop button. The first portion of the session ID will be train for a training test if you're doing that with the secure browser, or live for any other test like a benchmark, interim, or summative. The session ID needs to be provided to students in order for them to log in. Generally, people just write it on the board for easy reference and then they erase it at the end of the session. You may also want to note the session ID for your own records just in case you accidentally close your browser. But as students start signing in, the approvals button will appear next to the ID. And once you approve students for testing, the test session table will appear in the center of your screen, which is going to then display the students' testing progress. We're going to look at that a little bit too. We're going to look now, though, at the TDS banner in its entirety. That banner across the top, you're going to see a set of buttons and your username. The student lookup tab is to search for student login information and verify login credentials. You can click approved student requests to review a list of student print requests that you've approved during the session. You can click print session if you want to have a screenshot of this screen. The help guide link in the upper right allows you to access information about the TA, the test administration interface. And then you can also click the log out button under your account to exit. Once you start the test session and students have logged in, you need to approve their test settings before they have access to the tests. So to approve students for testing, you just click the approvals button next to the session ID. You'll want to review the list of students displayed just to make sure that all the students chose the correct content area and the test, and ensure that all of the settings for each student are correct. This is done by using the little I button in the See Details column. We're going to talk more a little bit about that in a bit too. But if no changes are needed, you can select Approve All Students to admit all students to the session. If a student selected an incorrect test, you can deny student entry to that test session just by clicking the X in the action column and then redirecting them to select the correct test. Even though you can approve all students at the same time, students have to be individually denied entry. You need to deny entry if the student's not supposed to be in that session, if the student demographic information is incorrect, or if the student's required accommodations are incorrect. If you deny students entry to a test, just know it's not going to prevent other students from entering who you have approved. Okay, those students will be able to move forward. Once students log in and are approved for testing, test administrators will monitor their status from the tables on the screen. The progress column displays the student's progress through the items on the test. The test settings column is going to display either standard or custom. Custom is when a student's test settings are different from default settings for that test. If you want to verify those customized settings, you just click on that little I button icon. The actions column allows you to pause a student's test. If TDS detects that a student may have tech issues or require assistance at some time, a tests with potential issues table is going to appear above the tests without issues table. A more info icon will appear in the test status column. When you hover over that icon, it will display more information about the issue. And if students request a printout, a printer icon is going to appear in the actions column. But that print on request feature is only available for students who require it from their IEP or 504 plan. Okay, so before approving the student's print request, just ensure it's also going to be sent to a printer that's monitored by staff who've been trained in test security, because all printed test items, stimuli, reading passages, all of those things need to be securely stored and destroyed immediately following a testing session when students are finished with them. The approved request button allows you to view a list of every print request you've approved during the current session. If you wish to print this list for your own records, you just click print at the top of the print requests window. If you want to print a snapshot of the screen in its current view, you can click the print session button. This can be useful for tracking which students didn't complete their test and might need to be scheduled for another session. Just know it may be necessary to set your page layout to like a landscape or just the margins in your print preview screen on your device in order for it to fit on the page. Then remember that any printouts containing any personal identifiable student information need to be securely stored and should be destroyed after use as well. You have two options within the test administration interface to pause or stop testing once it's begun. You can pause an individual student's test or stop the entire session. To pause an individual student's test, you just click the pause button in the actions column on the table for that individual student. When prompted, you can click OK to confirm that you want to pause the test. For example, this option would be appropriate if a student became ill and couldn't pause the test their own prior to leaving. In the event of an emergency that requires all students to stop testing, though, like a fire drill or something like that, you can just pause all students' tests just by stopping the session immediately. Just know that if you stop the session, again, all in-progress tests are going to be paused. If a session is stopped, it can't be resumed, but you can create a new test session and just give the new session ID to the students so they can resume testing after whatever event occurred for you to stop it has been taken care of. If you need to do that, you just click the stop button next to session ID. A pop-up message is going to appear requesting verification to end the session, and it's going to log the students out. When prompted, just click OK. If you forgot to log out before leaving the testing session as well, the session is going to automatically close after 20 minutes of inactivity on both the student computers as well as the test administration computer. So you would then need to create a new session and provide the new session ID to students in order to resume. Okay. Upon completion of a session, you're going to click the logout button in the upper right corner of the page. It's preferred that you log out only after stopping, as logging out is going to automatically pause all of those things. Back to printing. Is it an option for students testing remotely? Nicole, no, that is not an option for students testing remotely, as far as I know. But that would also be a question you want to reach out to Jessica Wilhelm for, just in case there's something else. This table presents some of the common issues that you or your students may encounter during a test session. I'm not going to go through them with you, but you can review the slide later. If you need more detailed information or additional tech tips, just refer to the TAM in the Technical Specifications Manual for Online Testing for some guidance there. Now we're going to look at the secure browser interface that students see. Okay, you're going to notice that the first name, SSID, and session ID are all required for sign-in. Students must use the secure browser to log into the student interface. The secure browser is designed to ensure test security. It's going to prohibit students from accessing any other programs or websites during testing. After they log in, students have to complete just a few more steps before they begin. Students will be asked to view and verify their personal information. If their information is correct, they should click yes to proceed. If their information is incorrect, they need to click no and return to the login page. Then you're going to need to work with your school or district test coordinator to have the student's information either updated and tied before the student can log in again, or work with the student to ensure they have the correct login credentials. This is really important to pay attention to because some students have the same first and last names. Okay, the grade and the SSID need to match. So just be aware that those teeny little nuances are what can cause some hiccups on this particular process. On the Your Test screen, students will see a list of their assigned tests for the test session. This screenshot's for training tests, so just know it's going to look slightly different for benchmarks and terms and summatives though. After the test administrator has approved students' first test session, students are going to see a screen titled Choose Settings. This screen displays the name of the test, any selected accessibility resources that they have, and if the information is correct, the students should click Select. If any of the information is incorrect, they need to click Go Back and wait for more guidance from the test administrator or their teacher. Okay. The test administrator is going to read the required scripting located in the TAM, but remember that most of the scripting is actually provided within the system now. Okay. But there is still short scripting that test administrators do need to read. Okay. After verifying their test, students are going to proceed through the functionality checks just to make sure that their device is working appropriately. And then students can review information about the tools and navigation features that they're going to have access to during testing from the instructions and help screens. When students click Begin Test Now, they will be presented with the first question of the test. If a student is having difficulty logging in like an error message code or is going to display on their login screen. Similar to the previous errors chart, I'm not going to go through them individually, but I would encourage you to do so with your teachers and other test administrators because they are going to be the ones who see these. They're the ones in the trenches. They're the ones who are going to be troubleshooting and working on the fly to alleviate those and help make testing go as smooth as possible. Now we're going to explore the global tools and other features that are available for all students to use during testing. Again, these are available for all students. That's why we call them global tools. Okay. These tools and features are going to be discussed in detail on the following slides, but the red boxes here are going to give you an idea as to where they're located. So the notepad allows students to make notes about an item. It is item specific, so students can only access their notes for a question when they're on that question's test page. Notes will continue to be saved when a student moves on to the next segment, or if their tests are paused. Test items with notes will display a small, tiny little notepad badge next to the item number. The notes tool is not item specific. These notes are available throughout the entire test. And anything a student types into that notes section is saved and continues to be accessible even later during other segments in a segmented test. These notes are also retained if the student logs out and the test is resumed later. They're always available to them. Students can use the highlighter tool to mark text that they want to remember in reading passages like a math stimuli or in a text-based answer option, such as those that ask students to click a section of text to choose an answer. If a student pauses the test, though, know that any highlighting made before pausing is also going to be retained. The strike-through tool can be used to help students cross out answers they choose to ignore on a particular question, but know that students must still select a response to answer each question. Also, applying the strike-through tool doesn't prevent the student from actually selecting that as an answer. So help your students be aware of that as well. Another element of the online test that helps students succeed is the Mark for Review feature, because as they proceed through a test, students are required to answer each question on the screen before they can go on. If they're unsure of an answer, they just need to mark what they think is the best answer, and then they can move on to the next one, but they can mark that item for review before completing the test segment. At any time during a test segment, students can navigate back to marked items within that segment and review or change their answer if desired. Okay, this can be done either by clicking the back button in the navigation toolbar until they reach the desired item, or by using the items drop-down menu located in the upper left corner of the page, and then they can just select that specific item. Note that once a student's completed a test segment in a test that prohibits navigation to previous segments, or if they've been paused for more than 20 minutes, returning to items marked for review is then no longer allowed. Okay. However, that 20-minute rule does not apply to a performance task. During testing, students can also use the zoom feature to increase the size of text or graphics by using the zoom in button. Text can be returned to the smaller size using the zoom out button. An English glossary feature is available for students on grades 3 through 5 of the ELA passages. Okay. Students can access the glossary by clicking any of the pre-selected terms, which are indicated on the screen by a gray dotted outline. When the student hovers their mouse over that term, it's going to highlight in blue. And if the student clicks the highlighted term, a little pop-up box is going to appear with a definition of the term. And then they can just click the X in the upper right corner to close it. The masking tool allows students to cover up a distracting area of the test page. To use this tool, students click the masking button and then click and drag their mouse to select a rectangular area on the screen. To deactivate masking mode, students have to click the masking button again. Masked areas remain on the screen even after masking mode is deactivated. To remove that, you click the X button in the upper right corner of the masked area. The Select Previous Version tool allows students to view and restore responses that they previously entered and saved for a text response item. But note that the Select Previous Version tool cannot restore responses that were entered prior to pausing a test, okay, with that pause rule. If your school plans to test over multiple days when it comes to interims, or even your summative, you may wish to have students pause their test at a certain point so that they can resume testing at another time. You may also allow a pause for a student if they're taking a break from testing or if they need to leave a room for any reason. So whether they have been instructed to do so or not, though, students can pause their test at any time just by clicking the pause button in the upper left corner of the screen, okay? The pause tool is definitely more heavily utilized, though, during interim and summative tests, since those benchmark modules are designed to be administered in like one class period or one sitting. Some rules apply, though, when students pause their tests. So depending on the type of test and how long the pause lasts. So for all tests that have been paused for less than 20 minutes, students returning from a break in testing can revisit any items in the current testing segment, change their answers if desired. Again, this works really well if the student just stepped out because they needed a restroom break or something like that, or if they were called to the office to pick something up. That's going to be less than 20 minutes. Students taking all tests except writing who have paused their tests for longer than 20 minutes are only going to be able to return to the most recently visited page that contains unanswered test items in the current test segment. Okay, they can change any answers present on that page, but they won't be able to access items on any previous pages if their test was paused longer than 20 minutes. If all items on the most recently visited page were answered prior to pausing, the student will resume the test on the next page with the unanswered items, and they won't then be allowed to access the previous page. So I want you to think like a science test that has a cluster item with 6 or 7 questions. If the student has responded to all of them, even if they weren't finished, like if they thought, oh, I answered this, but I might want to go back, if they have answered all of them and then they pause their test and come back the following day, it's not going to keep them on that same one because they've already responded to all of the questions. Okay, so know that if they leave some of the responses unvisited, it will allow them to return to that page. But if they've all been visited and responded to, it will not. Also, as another added security measure, after 20 minutes of test inactivity, students are logged out and their tests are paused automatically. So students will actually receive a warning message prior to being logged out, and they have to click an OK on a pop-up message within 30 seconds to avoid automatically logging out of the paused test. If the student's test is paused due to inactivity, the same rules apply as when the student intentionally pauses a test. The student can log right back in and test again and resume from the point that they were when it was interrupted, subject to the pause rule if applicable. Okay, they can still log in and continue. Generally speaking, though, if a computer has been left for 20 minutes, if the student is even still there, they will see that pop-up feature. The Math Grade 6 interim and summative tests are presented in segments. So there's 2 parts. When students reach the end of a test segment, they're going to receive a warning message asking them to confirm that they want to move on to the next segment. The warning also advises that they cannot return to change their answers in the current segment once they've moved on. So a test administrator should ensure that the students understand the outcome of ending that segment and just encourage students to check their answers before moving on, okay? The test administrator will also then need to approve the student before they can enter that second segment of the test because that includes the calculator global tool. When students have answered the final question on a test, the End Test button will appear in the upper left section of the screen. That End Test button does not even become visible until the student has selected at least one response to every single question on the test. If students click the Next button at this point, they will see a pop-up message advising them to click End Test when they've completed reviewing their answers. They may also click the Back button to go back and revisit any previous items, subject to the pause rule, of course, if it had been applied during the test. For writing tests, though, test administrators, please be sure that students have completed the entire task before submitting. If students are going to take a break during the writing test, they need to pause their test rather than end their test. The End Test button is going to appear on the screen as soon as the student has begun answering the prompt, okay? So as soon as they first start typing, End is going to become an option for them. But if they're going to test over multiple days, they need to pause. It wouldn't be bad to share this slide with your students so they're fully aware of what occurs when they hit the End Test in any scenario. When students are ready to end the test, they click the End Test button, and a pop-up message is going to appear to allow them to select yes, if yes, they are in fact ready to end, or no, if they're not. Okay. This is also a great time to have some set procedures in place, like having students notify the teacher before submission. The TAM has very specific directions for ending tests. If you have a click-happy student who submits a writing test before they're finished, it can be reopened through a test appeal if it was submitted inadvertently, though. Okay. And again, guidance is provided in the TIDE user guide on how to do that. Are there any questions now for test administration itself? This is a big section, but hopefully a review as well. Not much has changed. Not seeing anything in the chat. We're good to move on to reporting. Okay. For reporting, when you log into the reporting system, the first thing you see is the dashboard where you can view overall assessment results for all of your assessments listed by assessment. Okay, teachers can also view a list of their students. The dashboard generator allows the user to determine which types of test groups they want to start with, as well as being able to default those selections for subsequent logins. This screen will allow you to do a quick search for a specific SSID, as well as change various settings in the features and tools menu, like changing reporting time period to look at historical RISE data, downloading student results, as well as other functionality. Once you've selected the test groups, any relevant settings, you're going to go to the dashboard, the little green button there at the bottom, and that's going to take you then to the selection. Okay. The selections chosen, though, can be changed at any time by using the dashboard generator link that's up at the top left of the screen. This screen also shows the filters panel to the left of the tables. It is expanded to show the options available to the user. If you're not initially seeing expected information, check your filters, because oftentimes it's just because these are set to view a specific data set, which could be excluding what you are actually looking for. To view school level results as an LEA user, you'll select the desired test from the list and then select the school you want to view. You can use arrows across the top to sort by student count, completion rate, as well as skill score. If you are wanting to search for previous year's RISE data, you'll need to change the reporting time to the desired school year, and then determine which students you want to view, because you can view your current students or your previous students. You can view current students' past performance, meaning you can keep the date or reset it to today. You can also view the performance of your former students by setting the date to a day when those were associated with you and they'd started testing. Okay. The Performance by Roster tab displays assessment results for each class. Users can sort roster level data by performance using the arrows. The first few rows also show aggregate performance data for your LEA, the school, and the total students. Filters can also be applied for the type of test, the reason, the school standards, the school or standards, just depending on the screen. On this screen, it's possible to view and expand various tabs of classroom level data, such as viewing the top 5 best or worst items for any given benchmark, or by viewing total items available in a benchmark. After expanding an applicable tab for benchmarks and interims, you're going to click on the blue links at the top of each column to view additional data, including viewing the answers and rubrics that were utilized for scoring the question. Just note, this type of functionality is not available for summative assessments, only benchmarks and interims. Okay, this method is going to allow for sharing and viewing of rubrics and answers without revealing individual student scores. So you can view your students' performance in each area of the benchmark module or an interim assessment by clicking the reporting category section bars and expanding them. You can see individual items and student responses by clicking on them individually. Scores are shown as raw scores. A raw score is a summary of how many points the student received based on how many questions they answered correctly. For benchmark modules that have more than 10 items, as well as interim assessments. The 5 items where students performed best and the 5 items where students performed worse is going to show. Okay. Benchmark modules with fewer than 10 items do not have this functionality. Okay. If users selecting the individual item, you can just click on the number, the blue item number, and the teacher can then review that item with the students in a formative manner. Okay. Again, this functionality not available for summative assessments, but is available for benchmark and interim assessments. So when an item number is selected, it's going to open on the screen where I have it labeled to do so under the number 1 without any student information or other PII. So then the user can toggle between the most missed items using the arrows at the top, as well as the item and score tab, and then the rubric and resources tab. On this tab, you can see the content alignment as well as the correct answer. Again, this is intended functionality to be used formatively after students have completed it, so teachers can help students meet their instructional goals. Okay. You can also use the breakdown by feature to compare performance between various demographic groups. You can download student results into PDFs, zip files, or CSV formats. You can also print these reports. When it comes to scoring, Benchmark Module Reporting provides a raw score and a summary of how many points the student received based on how many questions they answered correctly. Okay, new starting this year, this is kind of fun, is an item analysis report, and it's available for every benchmark that reports any item data. Highlights of this item analysis report include item reporting categories and standard alignment, as well as item types. For example, it's going to list multiple choice. You can see on here, equation editor is also an item type. It's going to show you the percentage of the groups of students who earned full or partial or no credit on each of the item. Just as a note here, if an item doesn't allow for partial credit, the NA is going to display instead of a percentage. To access the report, you're going to navigate to an LEA, a school, or a roster performance on test report. In the features and tools menu, you can select build item analysis report, and then the item analysis window will appear open to the summary tab. That's the one you're viewing here. From the summary tab, to expand a table row and display more detail to a data, you can click on the right to expand all the rows. For multiple choice items, the detailed data includes the distribution of students who selected each option with the correct answer flagged with a check mark. For items that are not multiple choice or are multi-part, the detailed data includes the distribution of points earned. Okay. Again, this is new functionality, so this will be fun for you to go in and kind of get your feet wet with. You can also export the summary tab to a CSV file using the export button at the top right. You'll just want to select basic summary to include only the default table rows, or detail summary to include all the details in the expandable rows. You can also navigate to the single item view tab, either by clicking it or by clicking the number to the left of an item listed. This tab is going to display detailed data on an item, and below that, the item itself, including the rubric and resources tab. And you can navigate between the items using the item number buttons on the left and the right. Interim and summative assessments cover multiple reporting categories, and as a result, the following is shown in the reporting system for interim assessments. Scores are shown as scale scores. Okay, a scale score makes it possible to compare one student's score to another student's score, even if they didn't respond to the same questions. Okay, performance distribution is given using proficiency levels. Proficiency levels describe how your students applied the content-specific knowledge and skills outlined. Okay, with below proficient, approaching proficient, proficient, and highly proficient. And finally, longitudinal reporting to show growth over time is available whenever you see that little climbing arrow icon. Longitudinal reports are available at all levels, district, school, class, and student, for interim and summative assessments. Longitudinal reports are not available for benchmark modules. With that, are there questions regarding any reporting? When reviewing student performance on benchmarks, do students and teachers have to choose the same reason for testing for the data to be aggregated? Allie, I believe they do, but I'm going to need Colin to back me up on that.
I don't think the student has a test reason to select, if I remember. I think it's
That is true.
just
I
the
don't think I
day.
don't think students do either, but teachers, like if I have 3 math teachers giving the same benchmark, if I want them to all be aggregated, I do believe they need to have the same reason. But Colin is double checking. Any other questions in the meantime while Colin is checking? Okay, so at this point, we're going to move into remote proctoring information. So if your LEA doesn't have students receiving their instruction all online, you are free to drop off. You're also more than welcome to listen in. I'm not going to kick you out because other questions might arise. So you are always for sure welcome to be here. Just know that moving forward, we are looking at remote proctoring. Okay. So when it comes for administration of assessments in a remote setting, there are additional considerations above what would be encountered in a classroom setting. This functionality, again, is only available for students who receive all of their instruction in a remote setting. And because of the nature of remote testing, completing a training test remotely with the teacher as the proctor is also required prior to the administration of an assessment, okay? Any scripting is still provided in the TAM, and it's also still required. Again, though, a lot of it is embedded now. While completing a test, remote students will be able to communicate with proctors directly by clicking on the icon at the bottom of their screen. We'll review that in a bit if you're unfamiliar. Students also will not be able to see or communicate with other students during administration of the remote test. Because of this, it's imperative you have a second secure way of communicating with students, like your LMS system, so that you can communicate like test session IDs, things like that, prior to the session itself. The remote administration method for RISE testing allows teachers and students to communicate both through text and video chat within TDS, and additionally allows the capability for the teacher to monitor students directly. Students will connect to the remote test session using the secure browser, while teachers and students do not need to necessarily buy or install any additional software to enable it. They do need to have a device with a working camera, microphone, and ensure that the secure browser is installed on the on devices. Okay, teachers are going to sign into the RISE test administration site just if they were testing students in person. For students needing to take a remote summative test, there is an online student field in the student settings in TIDE. So all users will be able to see this field, and users with the school administrator role or above, like an LEA level user, can edit that. A teacher is not going to be able to edit that. And this needs to be set per student as appropriate per USBE remote testing policies. If it's set to yes, the student will receive the remote testing tools. If unset, like left blank, or set to no, the student will receive the standard in-person administration. This is your remote proctor checklist, which is provided in the RISE TAM, and it needs to be completed prior to any remote proctoring just to ensure that both the teacher and the student devices are working as expected. These charts describe the hardware and software requirements for the teacher's machine. The technology requirements to administer a RISE test remotely are similar to those used for any that are completed in the classroom, except that both teachers and students also need a webcam, microphone, and speakers. So before testing, you'll just want to ensure that all devices meet the minimum requirement for testing. To start a session immediately, teachers are going to start on the active sessions page, and they can start a live remote session, or they can schedule an upcoming one. If they're going to start immediately, they're going to start on the active sessions page, and they will select the appropriate test, just picking the subject and the grade, select the type, and then they can start their session. After starting the test session, a window will appear to allow access to your device's webcam and microphone. You need to click allow. You have to agree for this, okay? This access is necessary in order for your remote students to see and hear you during the test session, okay? So you'll select I agree and then allow it to proceed. And after selecting that, the broadcast window will remain on the screen. And then you have the ability to toggle your device's webcam and microphone on and off using those toggles at the top of the window. The dashboard looks very familiar if you've administered a RISE test before, both in person or remotely. The session ID appears along with the option to add tests, the approvals tab, the stop button, with the addition of the broadcast message, okay? And then the refresh page button. Do students still need to be marked as an online student and tied to take benchmarks remotely as well? Camille, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Colin, do students need to be marked online to have a remote benchmark? I know they have to for an interim and a summative. Yes, marked online. Thank you so much. And then can this be done with multiple students or is it one-to-one? Nicole, for your testing sessions, when it comes to a remote session, it needs to be 2 proctors for no more than 10 students. The 2 proctors must also be in the same room, same location. With RISE, they are even sharing a device. So 2 proctors and no more than 10 students. Two proctors, same room location apply to benchmarks also. Delray, that's a great question that you will want to reach out to Kim Rathke with. I would assume so, but she is our testing ethics aficionado. Yep, no problem. That broadcast button that I mentioned before, that's the only thing that's different between a remote and an in-person session. You can bring up that broadcast window at any time by selecting the broadcast message button on the test administrator interface. This training is going to cover more about that and how it's used. Okay. But now we're going to look at if you choose to schedule sessions. Okay. So if you choose to schedule the session, which is actually what I would recommend for remote testing, that way you can communicate the session ID beforehand. Step 1 is just going to look a little bit different, as teachers have to be prompted to set a start and end date for when the test is going to be available before selecting their test and session type. But all of the other steps remain the same. For remote sessions, a pop-up window appears in your web browser requesting access again to the microphone and the camera. Same thing, always click allow so that you are able to see and hear your students, and they can also see and hear you. After you've put in that date range, you'll need to select the test subject and grade, the session name, the type, and then save, just like if you were administering it in person or if you were doing a live schedule. The session information pop-up window is then going to appear, and this pop-up window provides the session ID that teachers need to share with students so they can join the session when it starts. This is what you are going to share securely, okay? This information should not be shared over any unsecured communication like a personal email or a text message. Instead, teachers need to communicate this information to students using the secure method, such as a classroom management system that teachers and students are already using for instructional purposes. You can also use an encrypted email. That's appropriate as long as students are familiar with how to access information in an encrypted email. Okay, this is just one of those reasons you'll want to conduct a training test using this remote format prior to your summative administration. You want your teachers and your students to be familiar with the communication process and be able to alleviate any of the stressors that might happen if they weren't familiar with it. If a teacher needs to, they can also modify sessions that were scheduled in advance but have not started yet. For example, a teacher might want to modify a session after it was created just to change the start or end date. To do this, they need to access the RISE test administration site, and then the option for editing or even deleting the sessions are available. For students signing in on their devices in a remote setting with the secure browser, they use the very same login interface, and the appearance displayed is identical to what they would see in person, okay? They'll log in with their first name, their SSID, and their session ID, which should have been previously provided for them. They will then verify their personal information, and then they need to select the required test. And at this point, they will still be waiting for approval from the teacher before beginning. So then the scripted directions for the test administration, again, provided in the TAM. Once approved, they will get to complete the same series of audio-visual checks that they would if they were in person. And then once a remote session has started and students have joined, teachers can communicate with all students in the session through that broadcast feature that I mentioned before within the test administration site, just by selecting the megaphone. In the type a new message field, the teacher can type a message and then select the send icon, which will then automatically appear on the device of each student in the session. Students do not need to do anything for this message to appear. And because we all know that students love a good text and chat feature, it also might be helpful to remind students that they do not need to individually reply to the broadcast message unless requested to do so. You are welcome to do that, but know that if you do that, you're going to have up to 10 chat boxes open on your computer at that time. Question in the chat, is a training test only required once per summative testing window? Rachel, I would reach out to Kim for clarification on that. I would say one training test in every content area at least. Students can respond to messages from the teacher by typing in the type a new message field and then selecting the send icon on their devices. When a student sends a message waiting icon is going to appear under their image on the TA site. So for a teacher to see the student's message, they need to then select the student's image and the chat pop-up window is going to open. When you're doing like a review of the messages, or when you're done, you can then just select the X to close the chat and it will return you to the main screen. Another question in the chat, is there a way for teachers to practice using the secure site before trying with students? Yes, that's the training site, because you can administer a training test using the secure browser just like this with all of the remote functionality. And Nicole, like I mentioned before, it is required for training tests to be completed before the administration of a summative or an interim or even a benchmark. With students who are testing off-site, teachers can also observe video of all students at once in either low resolution, or you can select one student at a time to view at high resolution. So teachers can view high resolution video of one student if they select the student video icon for that student. That video conference pop-up is going to appear. It's going to display the high resolution video of the student. And as with any of the other applications, you just select the X in the upper corner to close that window. Now, if needed, teachers can even start a one-on-one video conference with one of their students. Okay, this has to be done one at a time. During a video conference, teachers can see and hear the student, and if the teacher allows, the student can see and hear the teacher. You just do this by selecting the student video icon for the student that you want to speak with, and the pop-up is going to open displaying the video of the student that we just looked at. But you can take it one step further by selecting the call icon to then be able to speak with the student in real time. Okay, once that call is initiated on the teacher's device, the pop-up window is going to display a split screen view of the teacher and the student. And on the student's device, the video conference pop-up is going to display automatically. It's going to display this very same split screen view. Teachers can then toggle their webcam and microphone either on or off using the buttons that are displayed at the top of the window. Students cannot do that, okay? They also, teachers can also disconnect the call with a button at the bottom, just like you'd see on your phone. Students who need assistance can request it from the teacher by virtually raising their hand. When this happens, they're going to appear at the top of the class list. It just makes for more efficient monitoring, okay? Students who need assistance will appear with a hand raised icon next to their name on the list of students on the test administration site. And then teachers can respond to student requests for assistance by either initiating a chat or a video like we just went over. Question in the chat, is it possible to make it so when you click to see the student in high def that you can hear their background noise? Last year, we could only hear them if we call them, then we pop up. I think this could help us proctor better. Camille, that's a great question. But as far as currently, that would not be system functionality, but that is something that I can pass on to CAI, or Colin can also pass on since he's here, but that is not current functionality. When you open that video chat, you can chat with the student using messages, or you can call the student just like I'd shown you on the previous slides. You can also lower the student's hand once your communication is complete so that they are no longer appearing as a hand-raised student up at the top of your list of students. If though a student's question requires that you as the teacher be able to view the student's screen, there is also screen sharing functionality, which is pretty cool. So in the video conference pop-up window, the teacher just needs to select the view icon, and a prompt is then going to appear for the student, which is going to ask the student to give the teacher permission to view their screen. Once the student selects the I agree box, the share your screen pop-up window will appear, and the student can then specify if they want to share their entire screen or a particular window or a browser tab, just as applicable to what is visible for them. Once the student specifies which screen they want to share, they select the share button, and the screen sharing functionality is going to begin. A red dashed border will appear around the student's screen when it's being shared, and the teacher will then be able to view the screen. And there's two ways to then end it. The student can select stop sharing, or the teacher can select the end icon in the video conference on their screen. And just like an in-person session, test alerts appear on the list of students if the RISE testing system has not detected any activity from the student in a while. And this might happen if the student's computer has gone to sleep, or if the student is experiencing some sort of interruption. In the event of a test alert, all students' responses are saved, so there's no concern that students are going to lose testing data. Okay, but students with test alerts are automatically moved to a test with potential issues list at the top of the page. And teachers can respond as a myriad, like in a myriad of ways. They can either select the student video icon for the student to see what might be going on in their testing environment. They can also send the student a chat message, or they can initiate the one-on-one video conference with the student. In the chat, I can see Colin has followed up that yes, teachers need to choose the same reason for testing for the data to be aggregated. Perfect. Thank you, Colin. Backs up what I had mentioned already, which is great. I appreciate that. Once all students have submitted their tests in that remote setting, the teacher can end the remote session. But know that after the session has ended, or even once an individual student logs out of the session, the teacher and student no longer can communicate within the RISE system. Okay, guidance needs to be provided to students prior to ending, since no communication within RISE will occur once a student submits their test. So it's highly recommended that teachers and students use the training tests, again, to practice using the technology built into the system so they're already familiar with it. Especially with our younger kiddos, you don't want a third grader to not know that as soon as he submits his test, he won't be able to talk to his teacher anymore. That's why using those training tests is so important. If he's already familiar with that, it's going to alleviate some of those stressors, okay? Also note that stopping a session automatically logs out all of the students anyway, and it's going to pause their test if they weren't finished. Once the session is stopped, just like if it were in person, it can't be resumed. To resume a test, a new session is going to need to be started. So if this occurs, the updated test session information has to also then be provided for students, again, if that happens. Even with remote sessions, materials are considered secure, and they need to be stored between assessment sessions and then destroyed at the completion of the test, just according to your local procedures, just like you would. This includes things like scratch paper, graph paper that's been written on by students. You need to give them guidance on what they need to do with that when they are done testing, because they are not in your classroom for you to take care of it. Okay. With that, this is your help desk one-stop shop for RISE communication. Okay. There are their hours of operation for the help desk, as well as summative, because they do extend their hours for us when the summative window opens. There's also the email and their help phone number line. On the next slide, I have my email, Maureen's, Jessica's, as well as Kim's, along with what we do. So again, Maureen's going to answer all of your rostering questions. Jessica's going to answer all of your accommodations questions. Kim's going to answer your testing ethics questions and many of your remote administration questions. I am happy to respond to any of your administration questions when it comes to benchmarks, interims, summatives, any of those things. And if it wasn't meant for me, I'm happy to key in these other people that help us out. With that, this concludes our training in its entirety. But again, I am happy to stay on and answer any questions that you have. If there's still anything burning specifically, or again, if you had something specific, you are welcome to reach out to these people individually by email. And we are here for you. We are here for you. You're welcome, Brett. Thank you. That's so kind of you. You're welcome, Del Rey. No problem. Happy to. Again, if there's questions, you can drop them in the chat, or you can send individual emails to interested parties. Hey, Emily, I'm not seeing questions come in, so I think we are good to end our recording.